Right now on Upfront.
The president in Wisconsin.
But today we're making sure Milwaukee is coming back and all of Milwaukee coming back.
Countdown to November. President Biden again in the battleground with an urgent plea to black voters.
Is the president doing what he needs to do?
The race to 2024, are Democratic black voters energized?
The story needs to be told. I mean, that's what the issue is.
Milwaukee Mayor Cavalier Johnson, County Executive David Crowley, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, and Tom Perez all weighing in.
Then COVID test scam.
You believe this is widespread enough that people potentially could go to jail?
Federal charges, reaction from Wisconsin's U.S. senators. The investigation exposing potentially tens of millions of dollars in wasted taxpayer money.
And lost in the middle.
We think it's about time somebody listened to America's political orphans.
A new podcast by a former congressman, Scott Klug, is here just moments away.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a good Christmas Eve.
As the political calendar soon officially turns to 2024, campaigns are in full swing. And with the road to the White House running through Wisconsin, President Joe Biden once again in the battleground state this past week.
President Joe Biden.
A third and final stop in Wisconsin this year for President Joe Biden.
Hello, hello, Milwaukee.
Less than a year from the 2024 election, just weeks from the first primary contests getting underway, the Democratic incumbent in Milwaukee this past week visiting a plumbing company owned by a black small business owner who was helping replace lead pipes across Milwaukee.
How many of these have you done?
I've done 600, over 600.
600.
The president delivering prepared remarks at the Wisconsin Black Chamber of Commerce, a message directed at Milwaukee's black voters, when polling less than a year out is sounding some alarms for Democrats both in public and in private.
10,000 black people migrated, tens of thousands migrated from the South to the middle of the country, to Milwaukee, for good paying manufacturing jobs. Then decades of discrimination and trickle-down economics left communities like this one behind. But today we're making sure Milwaukee is coming back and all of Milwaukee coming back. And mark my words.
The president's overall job approval at 42% in Wisconsin, according to the most recent Marquette Law School poll, with the likelihood of a Biden-Trump rematch growing. Some Democrats are fearful black voters aren't energized and won't be ahead of November. Mayor, the black vote will be critical here in Milwaukee for the president. Is he doing enough at this point?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a reason why President Biden chose to come to Milwaukee, right? There are plenty of places to go in the state of Wisconsin. He chose to bring this message about economic success and future economic success to the city of Milwaukee, where the largest concentration of African Americans are. There's a reason why, of all places he could have gone in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin, he chose the Wisconsin Black Chamber of Commerce. He's doing outreach to the African American community right here to let them know about the successes and the future successes that will come under his administration. So I think the answer to that is yes, and there's more to do. We all recognize that. We all realize that. The president wants to get that job done.
Is the message resonating?
I think the message is resonating, and the story needs to be told. I mean, that's what the issue is. He's got to get out there and tell that story. And he's not just counting on surrogates to go out there and tell that story. The president of the United States is coming to Milwaukee to tell that story, and he's done that more than once this year.
It's no secret that the black vote here in Milwaukee is going to be critical over the next year. Is the president doing what he needs to do?
Well, I do think so. I think that the economy is really great, but it's really important to localize those benefits and to really bring people's attention to that. Now, inflation, of course, has been rising, and often that's kind of a lost leader to try to see people doing better, but to remind people that the cones that they see running around is money, that the apprenticeship that their nephew finally got into is part of what Joe Biden has done.
What do you think when you see some of the polling out there right now that says Wisconsinites trust former President Trump over Biden on issues like the economy?
Well, let me say this. The polling is very frightening, but I also realize that people, when they answer some of those polls, are very angry. They don't poll everybody. People don't necessarily tell you how they really feel. I think that what it really does is it means that we have to work really hard to tell our story, because Biden has this great story to tell. And Mr. Trump, all he has to do is talk about is how, pretending that there's a witch hunt after him when he has committed so many crimes. That's his only story and only message. But Biden has a great story to tell. So we feel pretty good about going into the next year with the truth.
When you talk to your constituents in the neighborhoods, at their homes, outside of events like this, are they mobilized yet? Are they energized?
When I talk to my constituents, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the world, in our community, but I think the bottom line is that people know that the real deal is Joe Biden. Whether they agree with everything that he's done or will do, they do know that he's somebody they can trust. So that's the basic thing, that they can trust him.
Free Palestine! Outside the president's event,
Biden, you can't hide!
As the motorcade arrived,
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
Palestinian Americans, organized by the Wisconsin Coalition for Justice in Palestine, protesting the president's backing of Israel.
We will campaign against him in 2024. We'll abandon Biden. That's what we'll be doing.
Are you typically a voter, a Democratic voter?
I am a voter. I'm not voting for Democratic or Republic at the moment, but my vote does matter, as I did vote for Joe Biden last year, and I will not be voting for him again this year.
Under no scenario?
Under no scenario.
Because of what happened?
Yes.
Inside the Wisconsin Black Chamber of Commerce, a number of local politicians, including Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, who's running for re-election himself in April.
When you hear these discussions that black voters may not be engaged and they may not want to come out and vote, how much of a challenge is it going to be over the next year, and what are you hearing and seeing?
Well, I think we need to put this in perspective. We're still a year out from this election, right? And so people are still focusing on whether they're going to be getting their kids for the holidays. There are still real world things that people are focused on right now as we move into this election cycle. But when I think about the investments that President Biden and Vice President Harris have made in Milwaukee County, we definitely have a message to take back, particularly to black voters. When we think about the dollars that we've invested in affordable housing in Milwaukee County, the eviction prevention dollars that we've been able to allocate all across Milwaukee County. But even when we think about the infrastructure bill, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, there are things that we can point to right here in our own community. But I would say that when it comes down to politics, we know that there's a disdain. People are tired of seeing politics right now. It's been up in their face. And quite frankly, the past few years, people have not liked the fact that in federal government, we haven't been able to get things done. And I would say that when it comes down to this 2024 election, whether it's my election or the presidential election, people want to see someone who's actually going to be working for them, who's going to come to the table, have these tough conversations, and who's also going to be accountable to the voters moving forward. And I truly believe right here within Milwaukee County, people will begin to wake up as soon as we get closer to that election, and we'll be seeing Joe Biden again for the next 4 years.
As a young Democrat, relatively speaking, how concerned are you about the president's poll numbers and his age when you look at a key state like this?
I think when it comes down to poll numbers, anybody could be concerned, right? But poll numbers are just a snapshot of that particular time. And I know that people are continuing talking about the president's age, but I would rather have President Joe Biden versus the other guy right now, because we're talking about someone who's going to be truthful, who's going to be honest, who's going to be transparent and accountable to the people. And so when I think about what President Biden and Vice President Harris have done for this entire country, I want that to continue to go on.
Tom Perez, the former chair of the Democratic National Committee, is now a senior advisor to the president with a preview of the administration's 2024 pitch. Tom, you know the ins and outs of this and how this all works over the next year. How concerned are you by the president's approval rating here in Wisconsin?
Well, there's only one approval rating that will count in 2024, and that is about 10 months away. And what Joe Biden is concerned about is, how do I help people day in and day out? And you look at the investments that have been made, the unprecedented investments in infrastructure, the unprecedented investments in broadband. And I'm confident that when people hear from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris over the course of the next 11, 12 months of what we're doing and what we have been doing and what we still need to do to finish the job, but we're a lot better off, and we need to continue to do this. and continue to make these investments.
Everything you just described, why isn't that message resonating with some of the voters you need it to?
Well, I think we're talking to voters day in and day out, and, they're living their lives. They don't have time to watch cable news 12 hours a day. They're too busy feeding their family. They're too busy making ends meet. And Joe Biden understands that. And I'm confident that, when people begin that process of really focusing on what's important to them, people want a leader they can trust. People want a leader who brought progress to their communities. I'm confident that they're going to see the progress we've made. And that's why we're coming to Milwaukee. That's why the vice president will be there next month. That's why I've been there 2-3 times to Wausau, to La Crosse, and elsewhere in Wisconsin, to make sure that people understand exactly what we're doing.
Now, this past week, the bipartisan Wisconsin Elections Commission dismissed a second complaint targeting Wisconsin's so-called fake electors who signed paperwork falsely claiming former President Donald Trump won Wisconsin. Just last week, one of those electors and former state party chairman Andrew Hitt broke his silence in his first television interview right here on Upfront. You can watch that newsmaking interview right now on WISN.com/upfront. Up next, a COVID test scheme targeting taxpayer dollars. Our investigation, the response from Senators Baldwin and Johnson, and a new update next.